Alright, so now that we're only 12 or so hours away from the Naoya Inoue versus Nonito Donaire rematch, which I'll be getting into a bit late in this video, I thought I'd give my thoughts actually on the fights over this past weekend, which I've been a little too busy to get onto, but I think I've found the time right now, just before I go to sleep. Now, the main events which occurred this weekend, specifically, Joe Cordina versus Kenichi Ogawa, obviously in Wales. You had the fight in Australia between Devin Haney and George Kambosos, and then you had the fight in Minnesota of the United States between Stephen Fulton and Danny Roman. Now, in terms of predictions, I was 3 for 3. I picked all of them correctly. Not all of the methods. I picked 2 of the methods correctly, 1 of them wrong. But the first one I'm going to get into is the one that first occurred. I'll go chronologically. So, Joe Cordina fought Japanese champion Kenichi Ogawa for his IBF super featherweight title, and was the betting favorite to win. I was actually quite surprised that he was. I picked Cordina to win the fight on the fact that I wasn't particularly impressed with Ogawa despite his big performance versus Azinga Fuzile. Ogawa is very crude. He's a good counterpuncher. He's powerful. He's physically very strong for the weight. But he is crude. He lacks the footwork to be able to cut the ring off against mobile fighters, which Cordina is. But surprisingly, Cordina employed a tactic which I was not really expecting him to do early on. I was only expecting him to maybe engage with Ogawa in the pocket late in the fight if he was to tire. But from the opening bell, he stood directly in front of the pocket, parallel with him in the pocket. And he was looking to find that right hand from the early outset, feinting that jab to the body. Now, when it comes to Kenichi Ogawa, Ogawa was looking to land that left hook pretty much from the early outset, and he was landing it quite a bit down the stretch in the first round. And despite the fact that it was competitive early in the first round, I believe Cordina landed some good body shots early. Ogawa was capitalizing on the fact that Cordina was holding his right hand near and around his chest to catch and shoot, and he was throwing his left hook over the top of it as Cordina was stepping in. Cordina wasn't really moving his head much, and in the pocket, he was a relatively easy target for Ogawa to hit, but he was feinting his shots a lot. He was keeping Ogawa tentative, and Ogawa was not able to rush in with his offense with no respect like he was against Fuzile, who in his case, wasn't really standing tall with him. And instead of keeping an active guard or an active jab, was just looking to just keep that right hand cocked and throw it down the middle. But in the case of Cordina, who does possess a bit of punch power, despite the fact that he has had some, career-threatening hand injuries, he was able to recover and come back actually in the second round and land a terrific right hand over the top and absolutely ice Kenichi Ogawa, put him to sleep. Ogawa was never put out like that, or even really hurt like that by anybody before this fight, and I was actually very surprised, honestly. I was thinking Cordina would outpoint him, by learning from the mistakes that Tevin Farmer made, a bit too much shoe shining and not enough activity in a lot of cases to convince the judges, and Azinga Fuzile having success but not really throwing enough and being too reliant on the power shots. Well, this time he came in just looking to set up power shots from the opening bell, and he capitalized and basically rendered Ogawa close to unconscious. Ogawa tried to get up, but the referee by that point had already waved it off. He was in no condition to continue the fight, and as a result, the fight ended. Cordina's now the IBF champion at the weight. He's been calling out Shakur Stevenson. For me, it's quite doubtful that fight occurs next. He says he wants to get that in talks, but the IBF supposedly wants to mandate a Shavkat-Rakhimov fight, which is understandable considering Rakhimov was originally the man supposed to fight Kenichi Ogawa. Personally, that's a fight I give Cordina a puncher's chance to win. I think Rakhimov would be the favorite, but Cordina... One thing about Shavkat Rakhimov and what he's shown both in the amateurs and the professionals, he is a bit chinny. He doesn't have the best stamina. And he is also even susceptible to the body. But one thing with Rakhimov is he's, in my opinion, a better boxer than Cordina. Rakhimov is active. He's improved his technique in terms of his power shots. He's got a nice jab. He can fight well coming forward or going backwards. But instead of a guy like Fuzile, who is moving around, then pot-shotting, resetting, then pot-shotting, Cordina's going to be standing in the pocket with him. So, Rakhimov attempting to fight in pursuit, I think will have more success in this case. And I think Rakhimov will be able to outbox him should he not get caught. But that's still a very interesting fight. And if he's to beat a Shavkat Rakhimov, he's definitely legit in the division, considering what Rakhimov was able to do to Jojo Diaz, who... very good fighter, did show up to the fight out of shape, but for the most part was getting outboxed early, then came back in the second half due to Rakhimov's, once again, compromised cardio, let's be real. But big win for Cordina. I was surprised at the fashion in which he won, but was not surprised that he won. New additions to the division, and even guys like Hector Luis Garcia, who's going to be fighting Gutierrez next, I believe. It's always exciting to see new additions to the division, and it's good to see Cordina prove himself and cement his name at this level, because 130, while a deep division, does need those young guys to kind of step up. And then you have other guys in the waiting, like, say, Albert Bell and people like that coming through the ranks. We'll see. But anyways, moving forward, let's get to the Stephen Fulton versus Danny Roman fight. Now, I was incredibly impressed with Stephen Fulton's performance in this fight. I was thinking it would be a rather 50-50 type of a fight the whole way through, where Fulton would just be able to edge a decision on his early work. But it was actually Fulton who, while he took control of the fight for the most part early, Roman came on a bit in the middle rounds. It was actually Stephen Fulton who, on his great cardio, on his boxing ability, on his foot movement, his jab, and his increased activity in this fight, was able to outbox Danny Roman and pretty much dominate down the stretch of the fight. Now, one thing with Roman down the stretch, which I wasn't really expecting, was he was actually starting to tire. Roman's weakness in this fight, and what dearly cost him, was his ability to cut the ring off. Danny Roman is not particularly strong in that aspect. Now, that's the main reason, actually, he struggled so much against Juan Carlos Payano. And even why guys like TJ Haney were able to outbox him, and same with Murodjon Akhmadaliev. One thing with Akhmadaliev, though, is Akhmadaliev wasn't really fighting near the perimeter of the ring or forcing him to cut the ring off. He was fighting very much in and out, and trying to explode an ambush with power shots, get back out, step back in. So he was giving Roman a lot of counter-punching opportunities, especially with the fact that he was fighting with his hands down for a big portion of the fight. But Fulton, similarly to Akhmadaliev, was able to neutralize Roman in the in the late rounds by matching him in his cardio. Now, on the inside, Roman proved to be the superior fighter in the early and mid rounds. So Fulton made it his goal to get back on the jab and pretty much pot shot him from the outside. Keep resetting his feet and keep landing that piston-like jab and straight right hand down the middle. That 1-2 was essential to his success. Roman didn't really move his head much in the fight, wasn't really parrying a lot of punches, because for the most part Fulton was not really occupying him with a lot of feints. He was using his foot movement. He would stand stationary, pop him, then get back out. A jab and a pivot. And Roman struggled to find many answers for that. Juan Carlos Payano actually came relatively close to beating him. However, the difference in that fight was the fact that Payano did tire in the late rounds. and was fighting very one-dimensionally, and also the fact that, he's a southpaw. For the most part, Fulton was fighting out of the orthodox stance, I believe almost for the whole fight. And he was starting to, especially as his confidence started to increase down the stretch of the fight, he was landing that looping overhand right over the top and around Danny Roman's guard. Roman eventually, I think, started to feel not really get concussed by any of the punches, but the impact of the shots, of the blows, in unison with his fatigue, eventually started to take its toll, and he was virtually ineffective offensively down the stretch of the fight. And Fulton, phenomenal performance. He dealt with Danny Roman in a fashion I did not expect, and he showed in this fight especially that he can beat a world-class fighter a number of different ways. His boxing ability, is world-class, definitely, but in terms of his ability to control the distance, he showed it at a level that I hadn't seen it at before. And we've already seen how well he can fight inside versus bigger and stronger guys like a Figueroa, or very active fighters and quick guys like an Angelo Leo. So Stephen Fulton, man, I give him a lot of credit for that performance. He is absolutely a legit fighter. I do think people are sleeping on the Akhmadaliev undisputed fight. Hopefully by some miracle it happens, but that's very interesting to me, because one thing I will say with Fulton is, despite the fact that he does have great boxing ability, I will say his punch resistance does kind of concern me. I mean, he has, don't get me wrong, he's not soft per se, but you can definitely tell that he doesn't like to get hit. I mean, even in this fight with Danny Roman was starting to, when he started to apply the pressure and trap Fulton against the ropes, in sort of the middle portion of the fight, where Fulton was starting to get a bit static with his offense and stand more in the pocket, he wasn't liking those body shots. And we've already seen Figueroa hurt him over the top. And he's a heavy-handed puncher, I guess you could say. But how is that going to bode for Fulton when he's getting hit by an explosive in-and-out puncher by an Akhmadaliev? Because if you go back to the Adam Lopez fight, I think in the first or second round, he was hurt badly by one of his shots. And he's a guy who fights very much dependent on his explosiveness and his fast twitch. To drop guys or hurt guys, like he did with Oscar Valdez. And Akhmadaliev is heavy-handed. I'd be very interested in that fight, because I'd say Fulton is a little bit better as an outside boxer. Maybe a little bit more skilled, but Akhmadaliev isn't far off, if there is too much difference. I think Akhmadaliev is better on the lead. I think he's better coming forward. I think he's better at cutting the ring off. I think he has a bit better guard in terms of defending punches. And I also think that, I definitely think that he's capable of hurting him, for sure. So I definitely want to see that fight. I don't think either one of those guys are really runaways to be the best in the division. I think we need to see that fight and really establish who the best guy is. And to be honest, I think Akhmadaliev, after that performance, I think he's under pressure to perform well against Rios, who could give him issues, as we saw with Velasquez, who was able to sort of grind down Akhmadaliev. Akhmadaliev obviously comprehensively outboxed him, 10-2 type of a fight, but was able to give him problems and make him tire a bit, make him use a lot of movement and expend his energy. One thing I will say, though, with Rios is his punch resistance isn't as good as Velasquez, but that's besides the point. Let's get into the Haney-Kambosos fight. I picked Haney to win a UD, a pretty comfortable UD, maybe a scare here or there. He had like a slight semblance of a scare in round 2, but otherwise it was very straightforward. He won, in my opinion, 10 rounds to 2. I mean, there's really not much to be said about this fight. definitely congratulations to Haney on becoming the undisputed champion. He's the #1 in the division right now until further notice. And let's be real, him becoming undisputed does a lot for him right now, especially in that landscape. Because really, before that Kambosos fight, he really had no claim to really be able to get any of these big fights with a lot of these other guys. He was considered the odd man out. Well, he signed what appears to be a short-term deal with Top Rank. And with Loma and the Ukraine situation happening, this fight managed to galvanize Kambosos. Kambosos made the decision to fight Haney for the 4-belt undisputed instead of, I guess, 3.5-belt undisputed. And, hey, Haney went in there and completely capitalized on all of Kambosos' flaws. He's a good fighter in the pocket, good counterpuncher. And against lesser opponents, slower-handed opponents can be decent defensively. But Haney's just too much for him. He can match him in hand speed. He's got bigger dimensions. He's a better boxer. He's got much, much better feet. And consequently, Kambosos, who doesn't hit hard enough to be able to really take Haney out or land anything significant, or isn't really good enough on the lead either, isn't bigger. His inability to cut the ring off was basically a death sentence for him in this fight, and that's just how it transpired. He had a little nice moment in round 2, and I'd say in the late rounds, Haney didn't really do anything much significant besides his jab, so maybe you could have given him one of those rounds on work rate, but very straightforward fight for Haney. I still want to see him in with guys like Loma or Shakur or maybe Tank, but, I mean, to be honest, this fight has done a lot for his profile, because he's gotten a lot of attention, especially considering this fight was on regular ESPN, and simultaneously, now that he holds all the belts, he basically calls the shots in the division. So now a potential fight with Devin Haney could galvanize a guy like a Ryan Garcia. He might see a bit more monetary value or return for his investment in potentially taking a fight like this. And this could financially potentially entice a guy who's in-house like a Loma or like a Shakur. And they might be pretty willing to take a fight like this against Haney. And I do think Haney, while he's very, very good, does have his vulnerabilities. I think the weight cut might be taking a toll on him. And I do think that despite this performance, he does still have his flaws. Like, as I mentioned, he still doesn't have the most protective Philly shell. He's gotten much better with his jab, for sure. He has one of the better jabs in the sport. But his chin isn't the greatest, and he still likes to fight guys in the pocket a lot, and does rely a lot on his clinch. So someone who can really break out of clinches and fight well inside like a Loma, I think is going to be a huge problem for him. I think if he's able to beat someone of Loma's caliber, I could put him in pound-for-pound discussions. But he might move up. If he does, so be it. But I think he might stay for another fight or two at 135, because there's still a lot of money in this division as opposed to 140, which has a lot of killers coming up who don't draw as much, like a Gary Antoine Russell, Danielito Zorrilla, Arnold Barbosa, Subriel Matias. So we'll see. Anyways, I'm going to get to a brief pick about my Naoya Inoue versus Nonito Donaire fight. My pick is Naoya Inoue to stop him in the middle rounds of the fight. I'll say round 6 or 7. I wouldn't be shocked really if it went the distance. But my concerns for Inoue are there. He is definitely starting to kill himself to make the weight. the way his cheeks are punching in, the way I saw his cheeks start to punch in at the weigh-in, or at the face-off, and the way I saw his skin start to also indent underneath his rib cage, he's definitely struggling to make the weight division right now. Definitely big. So I wonder if that could potentially compromise him in this fight. But I do expect him to get the stoppage. He is wearing, supposedly, Cleto Reyes gloves. So imagine his power now without those winnings pillows. But yeah, we'll see. I'm expecting Inoue to get the stoppage. I give Donaire a puncher's chance, but I think Inoue is the better boxer. And I expect him to, after the fight, probably go after a Paul Butler fight. Because Paul Butler, he owns the WBO belt, and considering the fact that he probably won't sign with the PBC, his best shot at getting a potential fight, say with a Stephen Fulton, would be to actually capture that WBO title. And for me, and when you capture that WBO title, you actually have a choice to move up and effectively sign a clause requesting a mandatory position if you win a title and vacate the belt without losing. So I think that's why Inoue is actively seeking after a Paul Butler fight. But anyways, let me know what you guys all think about these situations and what your prediction is for Inoue versus Donaire too. Have a good one. Yeah.